This is a Black Dog Woof Woof production. Kyiv, eastern Ukraine. The Russian army is 15 miles away, if that. The border with Russia proper is only 25 miles away. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm hanging out with my pals who've come along for the ride. Max, the owner of the Buena Vista bar in Kyiv, his friend Vovo, who teaches physics at Kyiv Poly, Mate and Thomas, two journalists from Slovakia. Max has brought along some scotch, and we're counter-attacking the bottle hard when incoming. The racket is picked up by the city's CCTV cameras, hence the distortion. We could hear the booms from our hotel. Kharkiv, a city of 2 million people before the war, is hit 40 times that night, on the eve of the G7 summit in Bavaria. In the morning we have breakfast, and then go looking for some of what the Russian army has done. At the first bomb site, we see what's left when a Russian Hurricane missile hits a council estate. The Hurricane is half shell, half rocket, punching higher than Mount Everest, and falling to earth with a bang. It came in, clipping the top of one of the block of flats, before barreling into a car park, frying dozens of cars, flipping one on its back like a turtle, and blasting a hole in the tarmac as deep as an upended coffin. Amazingly, no one was killed. At a second bomb site, we come across a salon called Beauty Home. On a wall is a picture of a stylized Ukrainian woman gazing at you, her shoulders bare. Behind the wall, the rest of the salon has been blasted to bits. A digger shovels the rubble out of the road. Ukrainians have a thing about making the place tidy as soon as possible. It's yet another example of their grace under pressure. At the third bomb site, the missile plunged into a dirt road, smashing windows and masonry and roofs all around, and digging a hole so deep you could lose a London bus in it. The missile hit a water main, which burst so Vladimir Putin has created a pond at the end of the lane. Alla, in her 60s, was sleeping in her pretty wooden cottage when the missile blasted the road, a good chunk of her front garden, and her greenhouse to kingdom come. She was saved by the two wooden doors between her and the Kremlin's heavy metal. Her father, Leonid, in his 80s, spent his whole life working in the Soviet rocket industry, so this, he says, was a present from his former work colleagues. To talk to them, I have to walk over broken glass and splintered wood and blasted herbs. So Vladimir Putin left them a present of a new fish pond, but he put it in the wrong place.
Ну, я думаю, переведите. Я думаю, что не только он виноват.
It's not only blame for Putin.
Там среди них, возле него тоже есть.
Behind him, too many other people, other criminals.
This is now a common reaction in Ukraine, that not just Putin but Russia itself is the monster. This happened during the Second World War in Britain too. To begin with, people hated Hitler, but not the Germans. As the war dragged on, more and more lives were lost. Sympathy for the German people started to wither. Listeners to this podcast will know that I believe passionately that there is another Russia. But all the good Russians I know who fought the Kremlin have been poisoned or shot or jailed or fled, so now there seems to be no one left. When Ukrainians blasted their friends and lovers killed, call all Russians monsters, I disagree. But my Minority Report seems more feeble and esoteric by the day. The bleak news is that Russia still trembles under Vladimir Putin's boot, and bleaker yet. As he spills so much blood in Ukraine, it feels like he is winning. Later in this episode, I shall talk to Vlad Demchenko, the Ukrainian soldier who arrested me on day 2 on suspicion of me being a Russian spy. Do I look like a Russian spy? About the responsibility of ordinary Russians for the war. In Kharkiv, we go towards the front line, get blocked at a Ukrainian army checkpoint, the first days of the Battle of Kyiv, when you could go anywhere you please, have long gone. And I call someone who I've only met through social media. You may have seen Sarah on one of my diary films on Twitter. Kyiv Diary, day 123 of Vladimir Putin's war. I'm in the front line, and I'm with Sarah. What's your surname?
Ashton Cirillo.
And Sarah's from Las Vegas. Of course she is. That's an artillery exchange between the Russian army and the Ukrainian army. How far away are they?
They're anywhere from 3 miles to approximately 10 miles, 5 kilometers to 15 kilometers, depending on how flexible the front line is on any given day around this area where we are.
So that, by the way, is the reason why I'm not wearing my lucky orange hat, because it's orange. I've still got it in my pocket. I'm going to quickly show it to the camera, but I'm not wearing it because the Russian army might be effectively 3 miles away. Behind us is a tank. If you can see it, it's not a tank, it's an armoured personnel carrier with tracks, and that was knocked out of action in...
That was the first week of May, as they attempted to invade the town of Zolochiv, and they were taken out. Behind us is a T-72, which you were taking a look at earlier, as well as a second armoured personnel carrier, and all 3 of them were taken out with fatalities for the Russians by the Ukrainian counteroffensive at that time, which helped clear out the oblast.
And Sarah, you're trans. Mm-hmm. How were you treated by the Ukrainian army?
The Ukrainian army treats me as a human being, and they treat me as somebody who has earned their respect. And being trans never comes up, not good, not bad. It's just, that's Sarah. She's a journalist. That's Sarah. She's somebody who understands the battle for freedom.
And what does the Russians say about you? What does the Kremlin or the Ministry, which Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman?
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman, Maria Zakharova, referenced me as the trans journalist from Las Vegas, of course, who hangs around with gangsters, takes photos of gangsters, meaning the Ukrainian military, and that I epitomized why the Western media and queers were one and the same.
In our separate ways, Sarah and I are not in good standing with the Kremlin. So be it. So we have a simple message to Vladimir Putin, and it goes like this. Vladimir Putin, do fuck off.
Vladimir Putin, do fuck off.
Love from somewhere in the field, very close to the Russian army. You're listening to Taking On Putin, our final episode, episode 12, At the Sharp End, written and reported by me, John Sweeney. Sarah Ashton Cirillo came to Ukraine as a reporter in early March when the Russian army was at the gates of Kharkiv. Their artillery rained hell on the northern suburbs of the city, turning one community, Zoltivka, into a barren wasteland. This is where Sarah now lives. She takes us on a guided tour, just like you do in Las Vegas. Because the Kremlin Lie factory was nasty about her, being the trans from the States, who hangs out with the gangsters in the Ukrainian army, she is quite the local celebrity. As Sarah's tiny car sails through the checkpoints, I am once again struck by the otherness of war.
So since we're driving up here now, when things got extremely heated at the end of April, early May, right before the counteroffensive was successful, they were running out of materials to put up checkpoints immediately. So this van and another van were put in place as checkpoints.
In the middle of an empty road lies a van, skewed across the asphalt. Wow. And then there was a whole bunch of something else there as well, yeah?
Correct.
Right, and it's just that the van can't be moved or something, yeah?
That's correct. And right to our left, which we're not going to stop and look at, but right to our left is a hospital that had to be abandoned because it was hit by shelling. That was the regional hospital here in North Saltivka.
Compared to Kyiv, which is almost, but not quite, back to a pre-war normal, Kharkiv feels pretty empty. Here's why. You can get killed by a Russian cruise missile anywhere in Ukraine, but the odds of that happening are pretty remote. Russian artillery is good for 15, 20 miles, so Vladimir Putin's killing machine is too close for comfort to Ukraine's second city. 1 million people more have gone away. The pressure wave from the big Russian shells is so great that they flip cars onto their backs as if they're toys.
I've been coming through this neighborhood since March, and I only saw that yesterday. The car that was blown on top of a garage. So, up there is going to be one of the final checkpoints.
Yeah.
Leaving the city, but I'm going to take you this way.
Yes.
This was destroyed. This was one of the last areas that was destroyed in May, the entire shopping center.
Yes. And there's, we may not be, what we can certainly see is there are mortar splashes where light artillery has come in and put a hole in the road, and there's loads of them. So there was heavy fighting here. So the Russians were here.
The Russians were here.
And the Ukrainian army kicked them out, yeah?
Correct. They were kicked out by the first week of March, and that's when they retreated back to the villages. They went ahead and took control of some of these outlying villages, and that's why they were able to shell Ukraine all the time, because they were in villages that were 5 to 7 kilometers away. The closest I came to them here was when the no man's land was going on. I went north of the city and got within about 1.5 miles of the Russian lines. And the closest I've come to Russia was 1.5 miles, and that was up in Alexandrivka. This was another neighborhood, shopping plaza that was completely destroyed.
Now people say that I'm a bit crazy, but you're way more crazy than I am.
I don't know if it's crazy. You're a writer, I'm a writer, and sometimes we get caught up in moments that we know will never come again.
Yeah.
And I came here to write about refugees. I had never experienced war before. I had never experienced combat. I most definitely had seen tragedy, but I was not a war journalist or correspondent, and then all of a sudden, overnight, I became a war journalist. That's the only way to put it. And I guess my personality, as a student of Hemingway, a student of Orwell, of Gellhorn, understood what this meant. And so I just tried to put out of my mind what it is beyond the fact that I'm covering a story, and I am, and I've made it clear to my readers as early as March that they were not going to be getting equal coverage. They were going to be getting the facts, but the facts were already, by that point, I had seen the horror of what Russia had been doing in Kharkiv.
Yeah, it's not equal. It's I'm saying this as a former BBC journalist. There is no duty of impartiality to fascism.
I love it. Thank you. Yes.
That's the point.
Thank you, John. I love you. Exactly.
Not yet. That's a joke. But yeah, there is no duty of impartiality. This is like 1939-45. Mm-hmm. And to see it any differently is entirely and utterly wrong. Full stop.
Yes.
These are people at peace. They're not Nazis at all. How good or how bad have the Ukrainians been with the fact that you're trans?
It's amazing. They don't care. I've never seen anything like it. It's
good on them.
And I told the BBC when they interviewed me, I said it's better to be trans here than in the United States, because in the United States we get caught up in all these different aspects of it. Here we're focused on freedom, democracy, and liberty.
I told Sarah that back in the day, in 1988, before most people listening to this podcast were born, I went undercover to Prague and hung out with the Czech opposition. Václav Havel, funny, wry, a chain smoker with a terrible cough, like Mr. Wheezy from Toy Story. Within a year, he was about to go from disgraced dissident jailbird to president. Jerry Gienspear, his sidekick and loyal ally. And a third man, the writer Ludwig Vatsulik, who, with his gorgeous irony, used to annoy the secret police something rotten. Vatsulik wrote, Human wisdom is about respect for the beautiful, the unobtainable, or simply the different. That respecting the other, people like Sarah, is what Ukraine is fighting for, along with freedom, democracy, and liberty. As we drive north, keeping the Russian army to our right, a sound I last heard in the wars of former Yugoslavia rings out. Do you know what that is?
No. Of the graded road, you mean?
It's the sound of tank traps.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
so the tank traps have corrugated the road so that as we roll along in the car, you can hear this melancholy sound, and
Yes.
it's almost, sometimes I think it sounds like a wail or something like this, but actually it's the monster of the land, the tank. Sarah takes us to the village of Zolochiv, which sits just 10 miles south of the border with Russia. As free Ukraine goes, it's in the Badlands. Sarah is kind of the deputy mayor, helping the villagers get aid from the international agencies. The Kremlin rages against trans people like Sarah. But again, human wisdom means that you should not care about who a person is, but what they do. And what she does is pretty cool.
We've brought thousands and thousands of pounds of food, significant quantities of medicine. We've brought gas masks, bulletproof vests. We've also worked to get the International Red Cross, which I was just at the event last week where the International Red Cross came and brought a semi-full of tractor trailer full of goods for the villages surrounding Zolochiv. They met with the mayor, I documented that. And I have another load of goods coming in from west that should arrive on Tuesday for them regarding the hospital. Because the hospital has 6 buildings, 5 of them have been destroyed by Russian attacks.
Right. So in the distance, that's
not going to be Russia yet.
Yeah, that is Russian artillery hitting the Ukrainians, yeah?
Correct. And the way the dust comes up and the smoke that comes from that, it's most likely artillery and not rockets.
Right. Yeah, because it's rocket is more localized. The Russians, then, if we're looking over, I can see the smoke in the distance, and on the far edge, that ridge line, that's going to be Russia, yeah?
The far is going to be Russia.
And the smoke, that's the war there.
And those are going to be the villages just north of Kharkiv that you're seeing the smoke coming from at that point.
Yeah. You can actually see a second bit of smoke as well.
A lot of times when we come up a little bit closer, don't be surprised to see 3 to 4 different stacks of smoke representing the different points of the different villages that have been hit.
We are well out of the city now, in the rolling steppe, the land undulating under a great blue sky. The next ridge to our right, to the east, about 3 miles away, is held by the Ukrainian army. The ridge after that, another 3 or 4 miles off, is occupied by the Russians. Sarah takes us east for 500 yards, up a muddy track to a battlefield 1 month old. A Russian tank and 2 armoured personnel carriers got fried, their metal now by fire and rust burnt yellow. Ukrainians buried 2 Russian dead in a grave, marked by a stick. When Sarah first came up here, she did not know the whole story.
I was petrified because I wasn't sure if there were people still in it or not, and if I was coming up on the Russian army. It turned out that it was one that had just been destroyed. So just over there is Russia. We can see Russia from right here, and we can see Russia from right here. We are anywhere from 10 to 12 miles, but being up on this hill looking down into the valley, we have the Russian landscape in front of us.
And look at there's an eagle or something. In Zolochiv, Sarah shows us the local cottage hospital. Much, but not all of it, was hit 10 days ago. 5 days ago, the Russians tried again, but the shells overshot, turning a home to rubble. Sarah, tell me a story of what happened here.
We're just outside the hospital complex, and behind us is a residential home, and to our left is a residential home. And if you step just a few feet over there, you'll still smell the smoldering ruins of the house. 3 people died. They were dismembered. They found a head and 2 different legs. They have not been able to necessarily identify who the legs belong to. And the belief is that the Russians, in their heinous war criminal acts, were aiming for the hospital, as they've already destroyed 5 out of the 6 buildings on the hospital complex. And so you can see the war is still very much taking place in Zolochiv. We are standing in the middle of an active war zone. No one is safe, including the civilians that were living there.
In the middle of this active war zone, we stumble across a puppy, lost. I pick it up. Sarah puts it into her helmet, and we both go daft about a silly puppy. Too soon, an anxious man appears, retrieves his puppy, and we say goodbye to it. And a small, silly moment where we forgot all about Vladimir Putin's war is extinguished. The next day, Max, my friend who owns the Buena Vista in Kyiv, and I drive across half the country, from the east to the capital. In early evening, as the sun starts to dip, the news comes that a Russian cruise missile has smashed into a shopping mall in Kremlin. Max and I head there. It's 5 hours by road back the way we'd just come. So this is very much life at the sharp end. This is Kremenchuk shopping mall. A day after the Russian missile landed, it took me some time to get here. The jackhammer over there is smashing into some concrete. Behind me there are a gaggle of firemen sifting through the wreckage, looking for human remains. As ever with these places, there are some things intact. I'm looking at some books, paperwork which have managed to withstand the fire. There is some kind of filing cabinet, twisted wreckage pipes. The smell is the smell of death, smoke, charred remains, charred horror, and forgive me, I can't find the fucking words to describe this shit. The problem for me psychologically is I've seen this before in Chechnya 22 years ago, and then I saw it in 2014, MH17, all this aircraft luggage in the middle of nowhere in eastern Ukraine, shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile. My thinking about this is that it's also a terrible mistake. The Russians, I think, meant to hit the bridge or the oil refinery, not here, but they sent the X-22. It's a 60-year-old technology. It was first launched in 1962. You send a rocket that old here to a city of 200,000 people, it's very likely that you're going to kill a whole bunch of innocent people, and that's what happened. Dear God. Dear God. I'm sorry. I can't find the fucking words. I catch up with my old friend Vlad Demchenko, the soldier who arrested me on day 2 of the war for being a Russian spy. Yes, I've done that gag. He's now a lieutenant in the Ukrainian Army Volunteer Corps. We chat via Zoom. He's in the middle of nowhere, so the sound quality is a bit rubbish. First of all, I asked Vlad for his reaction to a letter from 20 German intellectuals calling for Ukraine pretty much to throw in the towel. So, Vlad.
Hey, wait, I don't hear you well. This connection is not very stable.
We can only do what we can. What I wanted to ask is, so these German intellectuals have said essentially that Ukraine should have some kind of peace deal with Russia. What's your answer to them?
I'm tired of these people, to be honest. Like, they are cowards. It's not a philosophy, it's not a science, it's just a philology for them. It's not what they are talking, it's only words. Like, it's words for them. It's fucking show in Ukraine. It's bizarre. My house was occupied by Russia for a couple of months. So literally some German idiot proposing me to give, to make a peace with somebody who took my home away. Fuck you, like, asshole. Really, like, literally, I'm so angry at this moment.
I understand. The other day I was in Kyiv, and there were these old people. They were sweet, Russian speaking, because we're in Kharkiv. A rocket had landed, smashed a great hole in the road, and hit a water main. And there was a kind of fish pond that had been created. And I said, Vladimir Putin's made you a fish pond. And the lady said, it's not just Putin, it's the Russians too. Do you agree with her?
Yes, John. And you know, again, like, people don't understand that Russians use Ukrainian word to provide their message into the world. Look at this conference when people from Western Europe invite Ukrainian and Russian sides to talk about our war, and immediately Russian use this place to talk about themselves, about how they suffer. They suffer so much from Putin, but what they actually do for to send him to hell? Nothing. And when people asking me what we can do, we should fight. Yes, you should fight, because this is how freedom comes. And Western country already forgot their history. They forgot those time when they fight for their freedoms. They lose a connection to reality. We are suffering from fucking murders, maniacs who want only one. There is a war between autocratic world, dictatorship, and a world that calls themselves a free world. And Ukraine really want to be a part of this world. And when I hear when somebody in free world teaching us that we should give up, I really doubt that this free world exists, to be honest. But again, I'm glad that there is still much more people who are supporting us. This is like really helpful. And actually Great Britain is one of the countries that give me, how to say, feelings that we wouldn't stay alone. We are fighting. We don't ask you to come to my country and die for my freedom. But I expect that if you call your world as a free world, and you really understand that we are fighting not for territory, but against somebody who claim that he will show you how to live and how world should exist. It's not the first time in history. So you probably should help us, like, just because it's a war not Ukraine against Russia. It's a war between ideas.
The war has changed. Russia lost the Battle of Kyiv because it threw too few soldiers at the Ukrainian capital. They lacked a good reason to fight, their logistics were rubbish, and their leaders were, in both senses of the word, bad, incompetent and evil. But then Vladimir Putin adapted to reality, pulling his forces out of the north, putting them in the east, where the Russian army's advantages in artillery and manpower paid off. Slowly, pitilessly, the Russian meat grinder has advanced, and far too many good Ukrainians are dying. There's a line in John le Carré's great thriller about the Cold War, the spy who came in from the cold. When Control asks Alec Lemus whether he has the human version of metal fatigue. Lemus ignores that point and goes back east, but I feel the fatigue. And so I think does Vlad. He fears Western timidity will give Putin a kind of victory.
What will happen is they will take a Donetsk region, at least those parts that they can capture, and they will claim that operation is over and will try to freeze it. And Europe will be glad to do it. And you know what will happen? In 7 years, we will have another war. They will capture Odessa, Mykolaiv, in other countries. They will cut Ukraine from the sea, and it will be a winning of Russia. If this war will be frozen by the end of this year, Putin won. Putin won. And it will just, it will open the gates for China. It will open the gates for everybody. Like, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, they know what we're talking about, and Poland as well. That's why they are so serious with helping Ukraine. It's only beginning. And to be honest, I'm afraid that like my life now is the life of the soldier, and I don't choose this destiny for myself. But I see that those help that we expect to receive from the Western world is just not enough. The scale is too big. So my prognosis that they will froze this war till the end of this year, and it will be Vladimir Putin winning.
Oh, fuck. That's depressing.
It's a reality.
I hope, well, we'll see. I hope you're wrong. I'm an optimist, but maybe I'm a stupid optimist. We'll see. We'll see. But for the moment, Ukraine is bleeding hard and it's bad.
You know, John, by the moment from 24 of February, only from 24 of February, more than 20 people who I know was killed. And it's only about who I know. I'm sure there is much more who I just miss the news about them being killed. Can you imagine, you are a person who know a lot of people. Can you imagine that there is like 20 of them dying in not natural cases in 4 months? Young people, like below 40. Most of them between 20 and 30. And smart people, nice, funny, like you spend some time. And I'm sure that there is, and I don't even count those who was wounded, who lose their legs, who have like a metal shrapnel in their bodies.
The day after this interview, one of the guys in Vlad's battalion was killed. And it was his duty to inform the family. The mental fatigue in this war is real. So is moral fatigue. There is no sign that the Kremlin's Lie Factory is shutting up shop, and that worries Vlad greatly.
The worst part of this, John, is actually that Putin using your powers against you by paying his puppets and just making doubts are bigger. You know, there is so many citizens in United States and especially in Europe, who are blaming their governments about like, they blaming capitalism, they blaming their governments. And you know what? I don't think they really understand what they're doing now. Because when you have war like this, which happening in Europe, you need to understand that all you have around you, all your fancy car, your fancy house, can disappear like that. And really, really, you should think at least one moment about why you have that. Because your culture, your political situation doing well, you can criticize it, but please appreciate that and understand that there is guys who will be very, very happy when you will like ruin this government. You know, you never think about that in serious way, that like Kyiv will be under rocket attack. And now I believe everything possible, because we have a saying in Ukraine, to ruin is much easier than to build. And you know what? It's much easier to ruin Europe than to build Europe. And Ukraine now in frontier of this war, because we are a country that a part of their world that don't want to be a part of this USSR old shitty world and try to get into the Western world. And this is how they punishing us.
So you fear that Vladimir Putin may well win?
It's possible. Everything is possible. My fear is that war will take fucking like 10 years, another 10 years. Europe is afraid, and they will be happy to froze this war. Putin will collect. They feel like the sanction doesn't work. They paying him so many money. Like he have money. He will buy weapons from China, from India, like from countries who don't care like about Western world sanctions. And he will collect another 200,000-300,000 of idiots and will send them here again in 5-6 years. And you know what? I'm afraid it's my life. I have one life here in this world. And why I should spend it to fight like some idiots who just don't want me to live how I want? This is like what I am afraid. To be honest, on some level, I don't care about Europe, Ukraine, Russia. Like just like my human feeling of responsibility, and like I don't feel it's right to let them do this shit. That's all. And it wasn't my choice, but somehow I read too much romantic books when I was a kid. But we're here. No, if I sound like really pessimistic, it's not. It's just I'm realistic. Everybody buying the gas and oil from them. They receive even more money than they used to receive before. This is everything you should know about how to say, like, values of the Western world. The values is oil and gas and comfort, not a freedom anymore, and right of speech and individual freedom. It's not like that. Now values, it's like, I want to be in a warm house. This is values now.
I share Vlad's frustration at those who don't understand the true nature of our common enemy. Vladimir Putin has gambled once again on the West's love of comfort, of our timidity, of our greed. If you've listened to this podcast series thus far, you probably share that frustration too. I develop all the themes you have heard here in my book, Killer in the Kremlin, published by Transworld Books in July 2022. There's an audio version too. My book is a warning, but any attempt to appease Putin is foolish, because he will take and take and take again. But it's time for me to wrap up this series and head west to the clickety-clack of the railway tracks.
So this is the final episode of Taking On Putin. I'm on a train heading from Kyiv to Lviv, and then Poland to London. Let me sum up some of the things that I feel about this place, Ukraine. I'm in awe of the people there, of their spirit in fighting Vladimir Putin's killing machine. I'm in awe of their grace under pressure. It's early morning and I've just passed a little fire, a thread of smoke lifting up. The trees are lit with a beautiful early morning light. It really does feel like being in the Shire, as my friend Vladimchenko likes to say. And in fighting Vladimir Putin, they're fighting Sauron. And in the Russian killing machine, they're fighting Mordor. And as in Lord of the Rings, I think the good people will win. I hope and pray that is the case. And Vladimir Putin, well, you go to a shopping mall and Kremlin, you get it, you see it. Shame on him. Shame on everybody in Russia who supports him. But also shame on us too. Because the reality is that time and time again, the West had an opportunity to take on Putin and we did not do so. We failed to take on Putin, and because of that, Ukrainians, men, women and children are paying for our mistakes in blood. So shame on us, because we didn't stand up to the serial killer who is the master of the Kremlin. I'm an optimist. I do believe that the Shah will defeat Mordor, that Ukraine will defeat the Russian army. But we should never ever make this mistake again, that when we are bullied and threatened by a powerful bully, we've just got to stand up to them. Not take their money, not give them the benefit of the doubt. You've been listening to Taking On Putin. Written and reported by me, John Sweeney. It's a Black Dog Wolf production. recorded at least this bit from a train somewhere in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Ukraine. Slava Ukrainia, which means glory to Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin, do fuck off.
In Kyiv, the recording was done by Syndicate Productions. In London, production was by Chalk and Blade. The executive producer was Laura Sheeter, with other production by the team. It was mixed and sound designed by Alex Paul Felix, with original music by Thomas Hewitt-Jones. I launched a crowdfunder to help fund this podcast, Taking On Putin. There are still costs. Lawyers, making sure that it gets to all the right platforms, making sure that the people that I'm working with, and I, stay safe from legal and other threats. I'm not going to spell them out, but use your imagination. If you've just come to the podcast series, you can still help with the costs. So if you can help me tell this story, please bung a few quid on the crowdfunder. In your search engine, dial in Crowdfunder, Taking On Putin, with me, John Sweeney. And watch out for my book, Killer in the Kremlin. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming along for the ride. The Kremlin won't like it. Take care, and love from Kyiv and London.